I'm 42, divorced, and for the most part, I thought my life had finally started to settle after years of chaos. My daughter Lily is 23, and while we've had our rough patches, especially during her teen years, we've always managed to circle back to each other. I never expected her to be perfect, and I've certainly made my own share of parenting mistakes, but I thought we had honesty, trust, a baseline understanding of what we'd both survived together. My ex-husband, Mark, is 48. We split when Lily was 15. The divorce wasn't explosive, but it was sharp, cold in the way that only years of resentment can make it. There was no cheating, just slow suffocation. He was the kind of man who always needed control. Me? I eventually stopped trying to give it to him. Lily always favored him. I didn't blame her for that. He spoiled her, made her feel special in a way that I sometimes struggled to. But after the divorce, she saw less and less of him. He moved to another state, started some business I never fully understood, and communication dropped off. She'd send him texts and sometimes cry when he didn't reply. Eventually, she stopped talking about him at all. Fast forward a few years, I'd started dating again. Nothing serious. Lily was busy with school, had a job, and I thought she was single too. She never introduced me to anyone, never posted much on social media. She was private, like her dad. I figured when the right guy came along, I'd hear about him eventually. Then 2 weeks ago, she invited me to what she called a surprise celebration. No details, just a time and a date. She said it was important to her and that she really wanted me. I was flattered. Honestly, I thought she was going to announce an engagement or maybe a new job. She seemed happier than usual lately, glowing even. When I arrived at the venue, I knew something was off immediately. First of all, it was way too over the top for what I assumed was a casual party. There were decorations everywhere, gold balloons, floral centerpieces, a freaking photo booth. I was underdressed, and the moment I walked in, people were already giving me strange looks, like I'd wandered into the wrong event. Then I saw the sign, Baby Smith coming February 2026. I froze. Baby? She was pregnant? That alone would have been shocking enough considering I hadn't even met a boyfriend, let alone heard about her dating anyone. But what came next unraveled my entire world. The moment the announcement was made, the moment the blue confetti shot into the air and people started clapping, I saw him, Mark, my ex-husband, standing beside Lily, holding her hand. And then she turned to him, beaming, and kissed him, right on the lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. People were clapping, smiling, shouting congratulations. I was rooted to the spot, staring at my daughter and my ex-husband acting like they were the happy couple in some twisted fairy tale. No one seemed surprised, except me. And that's when it hit me. They'd been hiding this. Not just for a few weeks, but for years. I didn't even realize I'd backed up until I felt the wall hit my spine. My hands were trembling, and I had no idea whether to scream, cry, or laugh at how surreal it all was. I just kept thinking, this has to be a joke, a twisted, cruel joke. But there was no laughter, no cameras waiting to yell, "Gotcha!" Just the sound of my daughter and my ex-husband thanking everyone, smiling like this was the best day of their lives, and maybe for them, it was. Eventually, Lily spotted me. Her face lit up like she was genuinely thrilled to see me, as if I hadn't just watched her kiss the man who used to be my husband. She walked over, belly barely showing, dress flowing, and she hugged me like nothing was wrong. That hug felt like fire. I didn't move. When she pulled back, she gave me this soft, glowing look and said, "I was so nervous about how you'd take it." That's when I found my voice, sharp and small. "Take what?" She blinked like she was surprised I wasn't thrilled. "The news, the baby, the marriage, everything. The marriage." I think I said those 2 words out loud because she giggled like I was being dramatic. "Yeah," she said. "We eloped last fall, in Arizona. Just the 2 of us. Last fall. My daughter had been married to my ex-husband for nearly a year, and I didn't know. I hadn't just missed the wedding. I hadn't even known there was a relationship. She had never so much as mentioned she was seeing someone, let alone that it was him. I must have looked shell-shocked because she softened her tone like she was explaining something to a child. She started going on about how she and Mark reconnected last year when he reached out to her on her birthday. Said they got coffee, talked for hours, and just clicked. Just clicked. As if that explained everything. I couldn't stop staring at her, my daughter, the little girl I raised, the same girl who cried when Mark missed her high school graduation, who told me once she wished she could forget he existed, and now she was married to him, carrying his child, and looking at me like I was the one acting crazy. That's when he walked up. Mark, looking smug as ever. His hand slid around Lily's waist like it belonged there. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm glad you came." I stared at him, trying to process how the man who once swore he'd never speak to me again had somehow wormed his way into my daughter's heart, and her life. It was like I didn't exist, like none of it. Our marriage, our divorce, the years of raising Lily, none of it mattered. And the worst part? She seemed happy. So happy. As if none of this was strange, as if there was nothing to explain. And in that moment I realized I was the outsider now. This little secret they'd kept, it wasn't some accidental slip-up. It was deliberate. They hadn't forgotten to tell me. They had chosen not to. And suddenly, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. I didn't say much after that. I couldn't. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the noise around me. Everyone else was celebrating, clapping, laughing, holding cupcakes with colored frosting, like this was the best day ever. No one else knew what was wrong. No one else realized that I was watching my world split in two. Lily kept glancing over at me like she was waiting for some kind of reaction. Joy? Anger? A hug? Maybe? I didn't give her anything. I just stood there, numb, quietly trying to piece together how this had happened behind my back. Eventually, someone came up to congratulate her and pulled her away, and I was left standing across the room from Mark. He didn't leave. He stayed watching me, smirking almost. Not smug like before, but like a man who had won a game no one else even knew they were playing. I hadn't seen him in over 5 years, and there he was. Older, yes, with more gray in his beard, but somehow exactly the same. He used to do this thing when he knew he'd gone too far. He'd get quiet, let the silence eat you alive, let you break it first. I remembered that look on his face, the one he wore when he was done pretending to care about my side of things. I walked past him, heading straight for the bathroom. I didn't even make it to the door before I heard his voice behind me. He said my name. Calm, controlled. I stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment he'd say sorry, that he never meant for it to happen, that he fell in love unexpectedly, that he wanted to explain, that he owed me at least that much. But instead, he said, "You always assumed you knew what was best for her." Just like that. No apology, no remorse. Just a quiet little jab, laced with venom. I turned around and stared at him, and he didn't flinch. He just looked at me with this cold expression, like I was the one being unreasonable. And that's when the whispers started. 2 women near the drink table, both looking my way. I caught the word ex-wife and the phrase real mother. One of them looked shocked. The other? Not so much. Like she'd known something. Like everyone had. I'd walked into a party where I was the only one who didn't have the script. Suddenly, I remembered every time Lily had been too busy to meet for lunch. Every unanswered text. Every vague response when I asked if she was dating. It had all been so carefully curated. Not just the lie, but my exclusion from it. And the more I looked around the room, the more I saw the truth. Mark's sister was there. She hugged Lily like she was her daughter. His cousin. His business partner. All of them smiling, clapping, celebrating. My daughter had not just married my ex-husband. She had married back into the family I'd spent years trying to heal her from. And no one thought to tell me. No one even thought it was weird. I started to shake, not from sadness, but rage. It was the kind of quiet, boiling rage that simmers low in your gut and threatens to explode if you breathe too hard. And I made a decision. I was going to find out everything, every text, every lie, every message they sent behind my back. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was surgical, planned, and I needed to know why. I left the party without saying goodbye. I didn't even look at Lily again. I just walked out while people were still cheering over blue cupcakes and baby shower games, like they weren't standing in the middle of something twisted. My feet felt like they were moving on their own. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word, but my hands were shaking the entire drive home. As soon as I walked through the door, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Something. Anything. I logged into old accounts I hadn't touched in years. Old photo backups. Emails. Even Mark's old social media, which I never unfollowed completely. It was still public. It hit me how little I knew about what Lily had been doing these past 2 years. She had become a master at keeping things vague. A few smiling selfies. Some group shots at brunch. Never any tags. Never any hint of who she was dating. And certainly never him. But then I found it. A comment. Buried deep on an old photo from her graduation last year. Someone had written, "You and M looked amazing that day." I clicked on the name. It was someone I didn't know, and their account was private. But that single comment made my stomach drop. You and M.I. went back to Lily's profile and opened every photo from that month. One caught my attention. It was just her, standing next to a black Mercedes. The caption was a vague quote about new beginnings. But in the reflection of the car's window, if you looked closely, there was someone holding the camera, the build, the arms, the watch. It was Mark's watch. I would know. I'd bought it for him on our 10th anniversary. I sat back in my chair, stunned. They hadn't just reconnected recently. They'd been together that day, that exact day. And I had been at that graduation, standing 10 feet away, completely unaware. That kind of secrecy takes effort. I started searching her name in my email, in old group chats. Anything that could fill in the blanks. And that's when I remembered. Lily and I used to share a family cloud account, photos, messages, backups. When she turned 18, I'd stopped checking it, said she deserved her privacy. I never deleted it, though. I logged in. The backups were still there. Dozens of them. I hesitated. It felt wrong, like crossing some invisible line. But then I thought of the way she smiled at her husband, like I was the guest in her twisted fairy tale. So I clicked. The messages loaded slowly, chunk by chunk, and what I found wasn't just romance. It was strategy. There were deleted threads, messages clearly meant to be wiped after reading, but the fragments that remained were enough. Her and Mark had been talking for over 2 years. It started with a few innocent check-ins, and spiraled. There was one message I read over and over. She'll never understand us. She'll think I'm brainwashed, but I'm not, okay? I see you. I always saw you, even when she didn't. It was Lily, talking about me. And then Mark's reply. She was always too focused on control. You were the only part of her that ever made sense. My hands were ice cold. My chest was tight. I was reading love letters written in my shadow. Not just betrayal, but bonding over their shared resentment of me. And then one more message, sent the week before the party. Are you sure you're ready for her to know? Yes. She'll hate us, but she'll get over it. She always does. They thought I'd get over it. They thought I'd just sit there and accept it. They didn't know who I was anymore, but they were about to find out. The next morning I woke up early, even though I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. My body was exhausted, but my brain was burning. It was like every memory of Lily's childhood, every conversation, every moment we'd shared, had been replaced with one question. How could she do this to me? I wasn't mourning the relationship. I was analyzing it, picking it apart, trying to figure out where it cracked, how I could have possibly missed everything. But deep down, something kept nagging at me. More than the marriage, more than the lies. The timing. She said they got married last fall. She was visibly pregnant at the party, and people were congratulating her. She was 5 months along. The math wasn't adding up. If she was due in February, she had to have gotten pregnant sometime in May, which meant they didn't wait until after they were married. Not that it would have made this better, but it meant their relationship was serious, even before the wedding. And something told me this wasn't just some whirlwind romance. It was something else. Something more planned, more deliberate. So I dug deeper. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, an old friend of mine named Jules, who used to work with Mark before our divorce. She had always suspected he was hiding money, sneaking it into different business accounts, and she'd warned me back then to keep my eyes open. I hadn't listened. I just wanted the divorce over. Now I was listening. When I told her what had happened, the marriage, the baby, the secret party, she went silent, not shocked, not even surprised. Then she said one thing: check the land registry. At first I didn't understand, but then she sent me a link, some public records portal for property sales. I typed in Mark's name, and there it was, a house, bought 6 months ago, under Mark's name, and Lily's. They'd purchased property together, not rented, bought, and it wasn't even in the city. They'd gone out into the suburbs, a secluded area with long driveways and gated lots. I stared at the screen, stunned. They weren't just playing house. They were the house, the family, the future, and they'd been planning this long before they ever told me. It wasn't a reckless, impulsive affair. It was a carefully constructed replacement. They weren't just building a new life. They were erasing me from it. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But that's when I made a decision. If they were willing to pretend I never existed, then fine. I'd stop playing the role they assigned me. No more silence. No more giving them time to let me adjust. I was going to expose everything, because what I hadn't told you yet was that Lily wasn't the only one who had been hiding things. Mark and I never finalized the post-divorce business paperwork. I still had access to one of his email accounts, and I had just logged in, and what I found next wasn't about a baby. It was about money. The account was one Mark had used back when we were married, mostly for business correspondence, contracts, invoices, tax documents. It had been dormant for years, or so I thought, but apparently he'd never removed my backup access, probably forgot. Maybe didn't think I'd remember either, but I did. And when I logged in, it wasn't empty, not even close. There were emails, dozens, mostly from the last 8 months. A different tone than I remembered. No invoices, no standard work stuff, just one repeating thread, something called Silver Grove Equity Group. I clicked the thread. It was a string of emails between Mark and someone named Darren. At first, it sounded innocent. Business partnership, expansion plans, projected capital. But then I saw the attachment titles: proposed ownership transfer, prenup bypass strategy, beneficiary clause draft, Lily M. I opened them one by one. The first was a draft of a property agreement, transferring ownership of one of Mark's existing assets into Lily's name after. The second, a note from someone, maybe a lawyer, explaining how, if structured correctly, their marriage could override his old prenup because our divorce settlement had left a few loose ends, namely one asset normally split. a legal form namely as the sole beneficiary trust fund just 2 months. Even his own sibling, who he used to be close with, just her, my daughter. It wasn't just it was financial surgery. He was cutting me out of everything and using Lily to do it. I sat there stunned while the screen glowed with these fake, polished documents. This wasn't about love, or timing, or even redemption. This was a rebuild, a new legacy, and I wasn't part of it. But here's the thing. Mark had always been careless with his paperwork, and he left a breadcrumb trail. One document in particular caught my eye, a scanned signature page from over 10 years ago. Mine, my name, next to his, on an old limited partnership filing, still technically valid according to the timestamp, still technically giving me joint claim to a company he was now transferring shares out of. That made what he was doing illegal. He never dissolved my name from the ownership, so when he used company assets to buy a house with Lily, when he put her name on those trust forms, he didn't have the authority to do that. He forged his own way through a system I still had partial control over. He never thought I'd find out, and now I had every email, every file, every date and dollar, and suddenly I wasn't just angry, I was dangerous. I printed everything, not just the emails, the attachments, the metadata, the signature. I wanted the full paper trail. Dates, IP addresses, email headers. I even cross-referenced the timestamps against my old tax file. Every time Mark used one of our joint entities to shift money into Lily's hands, he was doing it without my knowledge and, more importantly, without legal authority. He thought burying it under her name would keep it untouchable, but I still owned half the shovel. I didn't contact a lawyer right. I wanted more. Facts, not just fury. I took everything to a quiet little CPA office I'd used during our divorce. I trusted the woman there, Marissa. She was sharp, didn't ask unnecessary questions, and had once warned me that Mark's financial habits were creative, at best. Marissa took one look at the file and said, "You know this could end his career, right?" I nodded. That was the point. But it wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about Lily. Because no matter how twisted this had become, she was still my daughter. And the more I read, the more I realized she had no idea what she'd walked into. Yes, she had betrayed me. Lied. Married the one man she knew would break me. But she wasn't the architect. Mark was. And she was the perfect vessel. He'd always had a talent for manipulation. He made you feel chosen, smart, exceptional, until the moment you realized you were just another piece in his blueprint. He hadn't married my daughter for love. He'd married her to rebuild his empire and erase the legal chains of our divorce in the process. But there was one more thing I needed to be sure of, the baby. So I asked a question I hated myself for asking. I needed to know if the child was biologically his. It felt vile, even thinking it, but I remembered how careful Mark used to be, how calculated. He never did anything without a backup plan. What if this wasn't just about love, or property, or legacy? What if the baby was the glue? The one thing that would make Lily stay when everything else fell apart? That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called her. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I just asked how she was feeling, how the baby was doing. I told her I'd been in shock at the party, that I needed space, but I wanted to talk. She sounded relieved, said she missed me, said she wanted to explain everything, so we agreed to meet. Neutral ground. A quiet brunch place near the lake. I had no intention of confronting her that day. What I wanted was to watch her, because sometimes you don't need to ask questions. You just need to let the silence breathe. And what she let slip during that lunch was more revealing than any document in Mark's inbox. She looked tired when she walked in, not the glowing, radiant version I'd seen at the party. She was wearing oversized sunglasses even though we were indoors, and when she hugged me, it was stiff, like she was bracing for impact. But I didn't give her one. I smiled. I told her she looked beautiful. I asked about the baby. I made small talk like I wasn't dying inside, and she softened. Lily always needed warmth before she'd open up. She used to be that way as a kid, too. She'd build up these walls and act cold, distant, stubborn. But if I just sat there, listened, and let her talk, she'd eventually crack herself open without even realizing it. So I waited. She started telling me how they reconnected, how Mark apologized for the years he missed, how he really changed and saw her differently than anyone else ever had. She said it like it was some epic love story, like she was lucky he'd found her again. I watched her. I watched the way her hands fluttered around her stomach, the way her voice shook a little when she said, "Husband." She was still convincing herself this was okay. That was when I gently asked, "Was he there when you found out you were pregnant?" She paused, fork in mid-air, then nodded. "Yeah, we were both so surprised." And that's when I knew, because she had just told me, without meaning to, that she didn't plan this baby, but Mark had. Because earlier, buried in those emails I found, there was one tiny, overlooked message, dated 6 weeks before her supposed surprise pregnancy. It was short, sent from his account to an unfamiliar. "Start transition plan in July. Pregnancy will help solidify the trust structure. Must be formalized before February. There it was. Cold, strategic. He had anticipated, planned for it. He had wanted her pregnant. Not just for the optics. Not just for the legacy. For control. And she had no idea. She thought she was building a future with a man who finally saw her. But she was just a pawn in his third act. I didn't tell her any of this. Not yet. I didn't want to see her face when the illusion shattered. I didn't want her blaming herself, as she wasn't the monster in this story. She was just sleeping beside him, so I shifted the conversation, casually asking about their house. She said it was his idea. He wanted privacy. Said the city was too loud. That's why she hadn't invited me over. She wasn't hiding it out of shame. She was hiding it because he told her to. I wanted to scream, but I smiled. I paid the bill, and as we walked out into the parking lot, I said, "Just promise me something." She looked at me, and I said, "No matter what happens, don't keep secrets from me anymore." She nodded, swore she wouldn't, but we both knew she already had, and neither of us knew that Mark was watching us from across the street. That night, around 11:45 p.m., my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. It called again, and then a third time. Finally, I picked up, said nothing, just listened. It was Mark. His voice came through low and deliberate, the kind of calm that always used to scare me more than yelling ever could. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He just said, "Whatever you think you're doing, stop," like that. 5 words. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. He knew. He knew I was digging. He'd probably seen me with Lily and assumed I was trying to undo her decision to be with him. What he didn't know, yet, was that I'd already found his secret emails. That I had files, contracts, proof. But his paranoia gave him away. He thought I was just a bitter mother clawing her way back into her daughter's life. He didn't realize I'd already beaten him to the punch. I kept my voice even. Said nothing about the brunch. Nothing about the documents. I simply asked, "Is that a threat?" He hesitated, just for a second, then, "You're not going to ruin this for her." For her. That's when I laughed, quietly, because it had never been for her. It had always been for him, and the fact that he even called me, that he lost his mask long enough to reveal fear, told me one very important thing. He was cracking. I hung up without another word. Then I sent one email, not to Mark, not to Lily, to a woman named Angela Reinhardt, the lawyer who had handled our divorce and still owed me a favor. The subject line? Emergency review. Need you to validate beneficiary documents and prenup violations. Attached were 22 PDFs. The next morning I got her reply, "Are you absolutely sure you want to pursue this? If we file, he'll know everything, and so will your daughter." I stared at that message for a long time, because she was right. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. If I moved forward, I wouldn't just burn him. I'd torch whatever illusion Lily had left of her marriage. But then I remembered that message Mark sent about the baby. Pregnancy will help solidify the trust structure. He wasn't trying to start a family. He was trying to lock in his assets. He wasn't building a life with Lily. He was using her as legal leverage in his unfinished war with me. So I replied to Angela, "Do it." And with that, the first paper hit his lawyer's desk by noon. By evening, his assets were frozen pending review. And for the first time in years, I slept. Not because it was over, but because the war had finally begun. It all came crashing down 3 weeks later, in a way I never planned but somehow always saw coming. Lily called me in tears. I hadn't spoken to her since the brunch. I didn't tell her about the lawsuit, the asset freeze, or the fact that Mark's business partner had quietly reached out to my lawyer to negotiate a private settlement before things got uglier. But now she was calling, panicked. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why did I just get served?" My heart sank. She was collateral damage. I knew that going in. She had signed her name to those documents, tied herself legally. Even if she hadn't understood what she was signing, the system didn't care. Her name was on those transfer papers. Her name was on the trust. So I told her everything about the email, the backdated plans, the way he used her pregnancy as a legal strategy. I told her about the messages I found, how he talked about using timing to solidify control. I told her about the documents that named her not as a partner, not as a wife, but as a tool. At first she denied it. Said I was twisting things, that I was jealous, bitter. But then I offered to send her the files, every email, every transaction, every whisper behind her back that he had typed and archived, never imagining I'd ever see. She didn't respond for a full day. Then she showed up at my house. No makeup, no ring, just Lily, and a folder. She didn't speak for a while. She just handed it to me and sat down. Inside were bank statements, trust drafts, and a sealed envelope from Mark's attorney, something she wasn't supposed to open yet. But she had. It was a legal amendment. If anything happened to the baby or the marriage before the trust's maturity date, Lily would receive nothing, not a dime. He had written her out of everything unless she stayed. With him, in the house, in the image he created. And that's when her voice broke. I thought he loved me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She was already unraveling. The worst kind of betrayal is the kind that doesn't feel like betrayal until the damage is already done. And she saw it now. The gifts. The house. The secrecy. It wasn't love. It was architecture. She had been built into his plan, and I had tried to stop it too late. But this time, I didn't shut her out. I let her cry. I let her scream. I let her rage at me, at him, at herself. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, I saw my daughter. Not the girl who ran into the arms of my ex-husband, not the woman who hid her wedding and her pregnancy, but the kid who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and beg me to make them stop. This time, I couldn't, but I could be there when she woke up from one.